Hey everyone. Hey, real quick, I just want to check to see if you're a member of the coaches site because if you're not and you're tuning into the show, well, you probably should be. There is no cost or commitment to sign up, and you're going to be connected to a community of over 35,000 coaches representing 54 countries and 25% of the hockey coaches globally. Click the link in the show description below to get started. We'll even throw in a 10-day free trial so you get full access to our suite of premium content featuring some of the top coaches in the game, including many who have appeared on the Glass Now podcast. If you love coaching, you're going to love the coaches site. And now, on to the show. Jayna, I imagine that as a player, you had some sort of a routine to get yourself prepared for competition. In this second stage of your career, what does your routine look like as you go about tackling each day?
Well, honestly, it's a bit similar. I think a lot of things, I take from my hockey background, my sporting background. We all know the sort of character traits that get developed through sports. So I was a big believer in preparation, obviously teamwork, collaboration, continually challenging myself to get better. So when I think of myself now, post playing career and now um, in this environment, it's the same things, right? It's about being prepared when you enter meetings or you have conversations with people. It's about the hard work, that doesn't change. Teamwork, ensure communication is good, and trying to help lead people. So I think many of those qualities are the same, and some of them are natural when you transition into a business world or a non-sporting, team environment, and others maybe you have to work a little bit harder at. But generally, I think those lessons are the same.
So, just in preparing, speaking of preparation and preparing for this conversation, I had to pause because I was going back and looking at some of the interviews that you've done, and then some of the milestones with the league, and I started doing the math, and I'm like, shoot, like we're literally like all of this has happened in just over 2 years. And I'm like, gosh, if for me it feels like it's happened in a blink of an eye, I can only imagine what the experience has been like for yourself and your team. Um, but as we enter year three, what does success look like for the PWHL over the next season?
Well, as everyone knows, we've expanded. So entering season 3 with 2 new teams in Vancouver and Seattle, that's a huge undertaking. It's an exciting moment for the league. The growth signal that it sends in terms of where we're at, where the game's at. So I think integrating those teams into the league quickly, ensuring we get them up to speed. As you know, we sort of start from zero, and you have to hire a
Yeah.
general manager, and then coaching staffs, and then players show up, and the brand identity that needs to get built, and the fan engagement. And so it's a huge undertaking, and to do that in 2 markets at the same time in a relatively short time frame. So that's big. Of course, we're looking to continue the momentum that started in year 1, and we were able to carry through year 2 with our fans, with the takeover tour, visiting new markets, bringing the PWHL experience to more people. On ice, we look at the parity, the competitive balance that has existed in the league, and how do we ensure that that continues? Because I think that's one of our greatest strengths is how tight this league is. And any given year, it's really hard to tell A, who's going to make the playoffs, and B, who's actually going to win the Welter Cup. So, I think we're looking to carry that momentum, but also we look very different this year with 8 teams, and of course with the introduction of Vancouver and Seattle.
I was curious. So was it sort of preordained that you said, hey, by year three, we want to expand by 2 teams? Or is it a process of maybe you evaluating, when the timing is right? Because, it's really struck me that while so much has gone right for the PWHL, when you're starting something from scratch, there's also so much that can go wrong. And I would imagine that, these decisions aren't made lightly, not only to expand, but also what markets you expand to.
Yeah, I mean, I can say it definitely wasn't in the plan in season 1 that by season 3 we expand by 2 teams. But I will say when you really understand the structure of this league as a single entity league, we own all the teams, the leadership in Mark and Kimber Walter at the top, of course, as the owners, And then Stan Kasten, Royce Cohen, Billie Jean King, Alana Kloss, some of the smartest, most successful people in sports guiding this league, from a leadership level. We have the ability to be adaptable, make decisions quickly, not afraid to change course. There's rarely situations that haven't been seen by one of those folks I mentioned previously.
Yeah.
So we just have so much experience and leadership at the top that we've created a team that's nimble and that's willing to do what it takes to continue to deliver with passion and excitement. And, I think we all understand how meaningful what we're building is. And so that energy that comes from our team, I think, allows us to execute under, tight time frames. We just have great people that really care about what we're building here. And so, whatever the day brings is what we do. And it's been fun to see the evolution of the league, because I don't think any of us could have mapped this out on day one, that this is where we would be 2 years
I
later.
bet.
But it's exciting.
Well, in our world, so while we work in sports, we're at our core, we're a tech company, and there's a book by Eric Ries, and it's called The Lean Startup, and the premise of it is essentially that perfect is the enemy of great, meaning that you can waste a lot of time trying to be perfect, or you can get a minimum viable product in market, get feedback, iterate, and improve on the fly. I think there's a lot of parallels to the process that you went through. Like I can remember when the league was first announced and they said, we're going to start this year. I was like, what? Like there's no way. And it would appear to me that, part of that secret sauce, you touch on decision making, but at some point somebody has to make the final decision. And I imagine that in a lot of cases that's yourself. How have you learned to be decisive, or maybe just have a process for taking in information and providing clear direction in a efficient way?
Yeah, I think you're sort of spot on with the perfect and the perfection analogy. We have from our leadership a very clear, I think, example and message that we were going to make mistakes along the way. And that was okay. And
Yeah.
the challenge was not to make a big mistake that you can't walk back from. And as long as we're willing to fix any mistakes we make, we have the ability to think differently and think creatively. And,
Yeah.
so as it relates to hockey, some of those decisions fall on me, and I believe I'm a collaborative leader. So, I've surrounded myself with great people. I trust them. I think they bring different backgrounds and different ideas to the table. And, I think it's more of a traditional, like, let's debate, let's discuss. But at the end of the day, someone has to make a decision. And, I think that's just part of being a team. Again, learn that through sport. Like, once you make a decision, then you've got to quickly get everyone on board and moving in the same direction. And that's one thing we talk about a lot, is there may be different opinions on how we should do things, but once we figure out what that decision is, then the important thing is everyone moves together. And then, great collaboration across the business team as well within our organization. So counterpart, Amy Shear, I think we work really well together and complement one another in terms of our strengths and maybe areas of weakness at times. And then you've got the leadership board, as I mentioned, who, have really seen every situation before in one way or another. And so for us to be able to sort of lead on them for guidance and thoughts, and, they allow us to make a lot of decisions, but we know that they come to the table with so much experience and knowledge that that's a pretty incredible thing to be able to lean on.
No, I can imagine. And I'm curious, like in terms of your path to the role that you're in today. My understanding is that I think everybody's aware that you had a very decorated playing career, but there's this period, it would seem, where you're kind of you're going through retirement. I know you were an assistant coach at the University of Toronto for a period, but probably more impactful, you made a decision to go back and um, re-up your education. My understanding is you took some courses at U of T. I believe the Canadian Olympic program offered some programming at Queen's University in Kingston, where you're from. But I just there's a human side to this leadership, and I looked at that, and I'm like, at that point, you're married, you have kids, young family, like adding in extra courses on evenings and weekends. I can't imagine that's a decision that's made lightly. um, when you finished playing, what was your goal in terms of saying, hey, I want to go and acquire these skills, and when I have those skills, this is what that may lead to.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I think it was even a longer journey than that. When I was still playing, I remember hearing a lot about retirement and that transition and how hard it can be. And as an amateur athlete or an Olympic athlete in Canada, as soon as you turn
Yeah,
30, you start always getting the question about what are you going to do when you retire? And it's like, I don't know. I'm still playing. I still love what I do. I always knew I wanted to be involved in sport. I didn't see a lot of opportunity in hockey at that time, unless you happen
yeah,
to break through in the NHL, which was still rare for many women. So I didn't know if I would land in hockey or not. I spent some time coaching, as you mentioned. Good friend and teammate of mine, Vicky Sanahara, is the head coach at the University of Toronto, and so I did that while I was still playing as well. And then as well, after I retired, I did it full time for a year. But as much as I love the game, I knew that coaching wasn't the sort of lane I wanted to be in. Um, and so as I was getting those questions about what was I going to do when I retired, I started to think more about, how do I position myself to feel good about that transition or hopefully in that transition. And so I've always been a believer in continuous education and trying to learn and be better. And what I found when I started doing that and taking those courses, I did them over 5 years. So the intensity, it's another thing added to your schedule. But as I was playing, I was able to do it at a certain pace. But I found I was starting to learn new skills and find new things that I enjoyed, whether it was marketing or project management or strategy work. And then I was also starting to build a network of people that weren't just people in hockey. And between those two things, I started to feel more confident when people would say, "What were you going to do when you retire?" And I would say, "Well, I'm not sure, but I've really enjoyed getting into the marketing space, and maybe sport marketing would be something I'd be interested in." And so that confidence sort of allowed me to just keep going with that. And so, as you mentioned, did two different certification programs around business management and leadership. And that just sort of, I think, evolved as I wanted to ease my transition out of playing and in towards the next phase of my career. Because the reality was, and still is for, women playing the game, that you're going to have a second career. And
yeah.
you have to position yourself for that. And so that's the way I looked at it. And then from that point on, it was like, came in the first year as the interim commissioner at the CWHL, which ended up folding in that season. But I really took that as another, as I said, crash course in learning about the business of sport. Um, and then that transitioned into my work with the PWHPA and onto the PWHL. So it's kind of been just a continuous, I guess, journey for me in learning more and trying to be better and taking every experience as an opportunity to learn.
For sure. And I mean, you mentioned the CWHL. So, with the benefit of hindsight now, how valuable is it to have that experience and then transition to effectively a blank canvas to say, okay, like there are no constraints. Like we can, the seeds that get planted for this league can grow in any direction. My first question would be like, when you worked at the CWHL, was there anything that was obvious to you in terms of saying, hey, like if we do this again, these are the things that are going to be like that need to be the foundation if we're going to get it right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note that every one of these iterations of leagues was part of the journey to get where we are today, and we never
Totally.
would have skipped. We couldn't skip those steps along the way.
Yeah.
So I played in three different leagues as a player, and we called them professional. But I never received a paycheck. The resources weren't
Is
any
that true? Never.
not to play club hockey. No, never.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
yeah. So, I've been through that. And when I entered into the CWHL as the interim commissioner, the reality was we had five people working at the league. And this was a league that operated in Canada, the United States, and China. And we had five employees. Um, so when you think of that alone, when you think of the structure of it being a charity, the hope
Yeah.
is that people would donate more because they could get tax receipts. And then you think about, where partnerships were at. And we didn't have assets really to offer to corporate partners. We weren't on television all the time. So it just didn't all add up to be able to actually
Yeah.
move from that to where we are today. Now, it wasn't as easy as, just obviously going from that to where we are today. But in hindsight now, looking back and thinking, without the investment, those leagues never stood a chance to get to the point that we needed to get to, or we wanted to get to, or what the vision was, because the investment that it takes just to get something off the ground. And that's when we think about Mark and Kimber Walter and what they have committed to this league to get it off the ground. You can't do it any other way. And now when I look at our organization and, well over 200 people working across this
Is
league,
it really?
back,
Wow.
I think back to, it was only 2018 and we had a league that had 5 people working there.
That's crazy.
It's apples to oranges, right? So I think what the CWHL did for me was really help me understand like the structure that needed to exist, and what that wasn't something that could evolve into where we needed it to go. So as difficult and disappointing as that experience was, and having to work through that and deliver that message and live through that, it always, I always felt like that was going to be the impetus for something better. And people had to realize that it had to be supported differently in order to get it to that next level. And sometimes there's that short-term gain before you get, or the short-term pain before you get to where you want to go. And that's really what it felt like. But in the time, it was an incredibly challenging time for everyone involved, be it myself or be it the board or the players that saw the closure of a league.
For sure. And I mean, I just remember conversations with players around that time where I think there was this inner belief that, we're so close to getting it right. And I agree with you. I mean, I think that, we could look across so many industries where success is preceded by some bumps in the road. And that just becomes, but you need to go through that to realize the full potential. This is purely out of curiosity, but, when you were representing Canada internationally and playing, as you said, club hockey, um, you weren't getting paid. Like, how did you pay the bills?
Well, back then, there was, you really had to be creative, I guess, right? So I had a hockey camp I ran in the summers that I owned and operated with a teammate of mine, Lori Dupuis. That was one source of income. I had to learn how to be a speaker, and do sort of keynote delivery, that sort of stuff, various appearances and different things to try to generate some income, a few endorsements at the time. And
Yeah,
honestly, will say I was one of the fortunate ones that figured out how to make that lifestyle work. Um,
sure.
in the short term, many of my teammates, had to work full time, and we were compensated, as part of the national team under the federal funding program. But again, we all know that that's not quite
Yeah.
a level that you can necessarily live off on a day to day. So you really had to supplement it one way or another.
Well, and I bring this up because, when this league was formed, and I want to dive in a little bit to just sort of that formation, specifically around the compensation piece, and how that wasn't something you grew into. Like, that was just day one. You're going to be a full time professional hockey player. But what's really amazed me about the league, when I first saw that, I was like, oh my God, I'm like, just human nature, right? Like, I'm like, if I'm a player of your generation, I'm going to be so bitter and pissed off that I missed out on this. And every conversation, and maybe it's lip service, but every conversation I've had, with players, whether it's from Canada or the US, has been overwhelmingly grateful, enthusiastic, and just so happy. And I think the sense of feeling like a lot of pride that, hey, like, we went through all that so this could happen. And we stuck with it when it would have been easier just to get on with life and park the hockey aspirations.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, when you think about, would I have loved to have had a pro league to play in? Of course, I would have. That
For
would have
sure. Yeah.
been amazing. But at the same time, I wouldn't have changed any of my journey. I was so fortunate to be able to compete in 5 Olympic Games and play for the national team. End my career on my terms when I was ready. struggle through those moments. But those are stories we have today that, I share with teammates and we laugh about. And, um, those moments are important. And I think, in any journey, the players that play in this league today, in 20 years are going to be considered the pioneers.
Yeah, great point. Yeah.
Right. And so it's, you always sort of stand on the shoulders of the people before you. So the women before me that, didn't even get to play or weren't allowed to play. And so I think, having perspective around it's really important. And I think most people know too, when you struggle for something and then you achieve it, that's a pretty incredible feeling versus, being given something. So I'd like to think, the generation that I came from certainly, struggled through moments, in many
Yeah.
ways had great experiences. And the thing I love the most is that so many of my teammates are still involved in the game, whether it's the PWHL or not, but still involved in the game, coaching, in media, in management. And it just goes to show that, the passion that drove that group of women was real. It still exists today. And so I wouldn't trade any of it in, to just be able to get dropped in the league today. It's the journey was amazing.
I bet. I bet. So the CWHL folds, and I'm fascinated by this. So, what are maybe some of those initial conversations? I mean, we know that Billie Jean King gets involved. You mentioned Mark and Kimber Walter. What are some of those initial conversations to say, hey, we need to sort of maybe get stakeholders from various groups, and we need to find some, my sense is, first it's finding alignment. And then it would appear to me that there was maybe, the order of the chicken and the egg, so to speak, where it seemed like the one thing that the PWHL got right is they went after the financing first before the puck was ever dropped, where it seemed before with some of the, incumbent leagues, it was, let's get the league in motion, and then we'll maybe attract the sponsorship or the funding, et cetera, to make it go.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably summarized a little simpler than it actually
Sure. Fair. Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
But if we go back to where the CWHL folds, hugely disappointing moment for players, for fans, for everyone involved in the sport. And out of that, grew a united player group. And there was a collection of players and, the most prominent players in the world that really believed we could do better. And that goes back to, my feeling around it, whereas like as hard as it was, it still felt like there was something better out there and bigger out there. And, I think we all held on to that hope at the core of us that this was hard, but there was something better coming. And so that collection of players stuck together, and one of them, and this is me telling a story because I wasn't involved at the time, but one of them calls Billie Jean King, as many people in women's sports do when they look for advice and support and help. And the first thing Billie asked them was, "Well, do you have a players association?" And they said no. They were just a bunch of players. And she said, "Well, you can't create change if you don't have a united voice. It's the only way it's going to happen is if you guys stick together and you have one voice."
Yeah.
And that was why the PA was formed. So from that moment on, they formed a players association. There was over 200 players that were in the players association. Billie Jean King and Alana Kloss were sort of advisors at the time and just
Yeah.
sharing their knowledge. So the Players Association was formed, and they made the statement around they weren't going to play in any league that existed until one
And
happened.
when is this happening relative to when the league is announced? How early?
So the CWHL folded in March of 2019, and they formed this association in May, or at least they made a first statement
Got it.
first. So it
Yeah.
happened relatively quickly, within
Yeah.
a month or so. But again, it goes to the point that for many years there had been lead up to like how do we get to this league we
Sure.
all want, this professional league. Um, so once they organized themselves in a players association, that was sort of at the point when I came in, when I got a phone call from Alana Kloss and Kendall Coyne asking me if I would consider running the day-to-day operations of the PWHPA, so the Players Association. And I wasn't sure at the time if that was something I wanted to jump back into after a really challenging year, and the difficulty of what we had been through and the disappointment of that. But my only question to them was, is this what the players want me to do? And they said, "Yes, the players want you to lead this." And that was sort of all I needed to hear, because I got involved initially because I hoped I could make it better.
Yeah.
I still played with, I had played with many of these women. They were my teammates, friends, and I wanted to help. I wanted to help make it better. I still considered myself a player in many ways, or at least have that sort of player's mindset. So when they said, "Yeah, the players want you to lead this," that was sort of enough for me to say, "Okay, I'll do this." And then that led to 4.5 years of work with the Players Association. And in the early years, I think we figured out ways to make things work. We were creative. We had a couple other people that helped out in sort of raising money, and we had to find ways to get the women to play and get them equipment. And so we did that slowly and started to generate, I think, some excitement. And our main goal was to increase the visibility of the players. So people needed to get to know them, see their faces, have them become brands and ambassadors for the sport, because that was going to get people to fall in love with them. So we tried as much as we could to sort of put them out there and do that. And in the meantime, sort of hope that something would come along. Someone would, start a league, want to help. And it was a few years in, and of course, we had also gone through COVID at that time. So, things were challenging in many ways. But
No kidding.
it was about 2 years in when we decided, you know what, we can't wait for someone else to do this. Like, we've got to start doing this ourselves and take control of our own destiny. And it was around that time that, I had been connected with someone through a mutual friend who worked at Deloitte in the sport advisory
Yeah.
business. And, he said, "Yeah, I think we can get some people together that could help you guys, strategize and put a vision together." And so it started very innocently. And we started talking about, with this team at Deloitte, what could this look like? And, what do we aspire this to look like? What would need to be true? What kind of people do we want to attract to this? What kind of structure should this look like? And although, the end result wasn't exactly what we talked about there, the point was we were starting to own our vision and what we thought could happen and how we could get there, and start to design some paths, and really, I think, like I said, take ownership of what was going to happen. And over the course of those last 2 years in the PA, we worked with Deloitte. We built a fully costed business model for a professional league. And that was really in a way to get us to the point where we could start talking to investors, and we could start to talk to people that may want to come in and be a part of this. And through that process and through relationships within the group, of course, we get Mark Walter at the table, and can't imagine, finding a better, more successful sport owner in the world than Mark Walter.
Well, it's the equivalent, like, Jayna, if you were producing your first movie, it's like getting, Brad Pitt as the leading act. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, the zero, like, that's like going from 0 to 10. So how
Absolutely.
did that, like, were you a part of those initial conversations, and what was the pitch like?
Well, I mean, I think, as I said, it's relationships, right? And Billie
Yeah.
Jean King and Alana Kloss are in business with Mark and a few other ventures. And once we got to a point, I think, where we had really defined what we wanted and what we thought this could look like, and we invested in ourselves, right? Like, the money that was coming in through ticket sales or anything else with the PA was being reinvested into what we were building. So that idea of, the players weren't being paid to play in the PA, but we were putting that towards what we were trying to build. And I think that that's a really powerful story. And so through that relationship with Alana Kloss and Billie Jean King, that's how, Mark got brought into this, and looked at it as something that he would consider looking into further. And of course, there's lots of diligence that had to happen before this became a real thing. But I think we all feel incredibly fortunate and grateful that, we had that opportunity to bring him in, and to Billy and Alana for sort of making that connection.
Well, gosh, I'm so glad you're sharing this, because I think things happen so fast. I think there's so much of the story, the PWHL story, that's maybe slipped through the cracks. And, as you're sharing this, I just can't help but think that, I'm sure when you went and met with Mark, there was probably a PowerPoint, there was probably, some financial projections. But again, if I'm putting myself in his shoes, I would think the thing that would entice me the most is the fact that, hey, this group of women, and they basically bankrolled their own startup, Like they're this committed. Like just that in itself, I would think would be like, hey, if I'm going to place a bet, I'm going to put it on these folks over here.
Yeah, I mean, it was an impressive group of women, and what the players did over the course of the 4 years, and really, took some heat for it, but really standing up for what they believed in and having the courage to say, what exists isn't good enough, and we can do better. And many of these players in the prime of their career, where they could go elsewhere, and they could have made money to play, and but they really believed in what we were doing, and what we were doing, how it was going to impact the next generation and the next generation, and the game to come. So I think there's two realities. One, you've got this group of women that is incredibly strong and inspiring and passionate, and then the other side is, but this still has to be a real business, right? This isn't a charity anymore. It's got to be able to work as a business too, and that's obviously what any investor, I think, would
Yeah.
have to balance. So yeah, I have to think that Mark and his team, impressed with the mission and the determination and the commitment and all of that, but they had to make sure it could work as a business.
Yeah.
There was lots of diligence on that side as well.
So, again, when you guys are starting out, I imagine there's just so many boxes that need to be checked. You need ice, you need gear, you need accounts. Like there's just a whole litany of things. But what might have been, just given, Mark and his team's experience, what might have been some of the things they said, hey, like, as you said, you know, it's not going to necessarily be a smooth ride, but what were the things that they stressed and said, hey, if we get, one or two things right, it's got to be this.
When they, brought in Stan Kasten, Royce Cohen, Billy Milana are still very involved. So that advisory board, I don't think there's anything they couldn't do, but I think, them giving us the confidence to, hire good people, giving us the support. So whether it was, folks internally for one of Mark's other organizations that could jump in and help in the early days, like this was a full collaborative effort to get this off the ground. And with us being able to lean on that type of leadership was incredible. And in the early months, we had a very small team, but I can say like the work that small team did uh, was incredible, and that's why I attribute a lot of our success to our people. And I just think that commitment to just get it done, whatever it takes, raise your hand, regardless of what the ask is. That's at the core, of this league and the people in this league, and um, so you mix that with sort of the leadership and the expertise and the resources that were provided elsewhere, that allowed us to move quickly and swiftly.
So, as a player, and we'll dive into it a bit, but I mean, you played in a lot of high stakes games. But in those high stakes games, I mean, you can control your performance. You're sitting beside your teammates in the locker room, and you probably get a pretty good pulse that everybody's ready to go. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. It's a Saturday night in the season, and now you've got 4 games going on the same night in potentially 3 different time zones. Planes can get delayed. There's a whole host of things that can go wrong. Um, how do you manage, I guess, that pressure? Because I put myself in your shoes, and I'm like, I would get so much anxiety because I'd rather have 2 hands on the wheel, and having to operate something from a distance would at least appear to me as a real challenge and a learned skill.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of effective leadership, good leadership, when you can trust the people um, to do their job, regardless of where they are. If they're a team level person, if it's someone on my hockey ops team, um, just trusting them that they'll do the right thing. And again, we will make mistakes along the way, and where can we avoid those? And we have had moments in the first 2 seasons where sticks don't arrive. We figured it
Yeah.
we figured it out. We got it done 2 hours before a game, and a team could play a game, right? I think we had to cancel one game due to weather, Those are
Yeah.
things that, they feel like, you know, big things in the moment, and they are. But what are you going to do, right? You have to sort of make the best decision you can in the moment, and know that, when you look back, know you made the right decision, and know that, that one game it'll fit in somewhere else. You'll get it done. But in the moment, it's heated and it's intense, and there's a lot of things that need to happen from a communication level, like to players, to fans, to buildings, to, you know, ambulances, like everything that needs to be arranged for a game. Um,
Yeah.
Lots of things can go awry if you don't have, and you don't trust everyone to take care
Sure.
of what their job is.
Well, yeah. Again, I think we, as fans, we maybe don't appreciate the amount that goes on behind the scenes. Um, you know, I guess you never know the level of enthusiasm you're going to receive when you start out with something like this. And I mean, there was certainly, I think, a lot of advocates. But some of the things that we saw through the first 2 years of the league, the sold, selling out NHL arenas, and I think that, in particular for me, I don't know if you know, fans show up at a game in Toronto cheering for the Scepters as much as they're cheering for a bunch of 20 individual stories, and the enthusiasm is palatable. Um, based on maybe what your expectations were, like when you come out to Vancouver last year and you sell at the rink, like, do you have to pinch yourself a little bit in those moments?
Yeah, I think we all need to take a moment sometimes and take it all in, right? Because it's
Yeah,
easy to just sort of head down and keep going. But there were moments along the way when, absolutely. And I think in season one, to your point, it didn't matter where we were. It just felt like everyone was just so happy that this league existed, and they were grateful. Um,
yeah,
I would get stopped in the arenas, and people would just say, "Thank you so much." Like, they
no
don't
way.
want anything. They're not asking for anything. They just want to say thank you. And that's a pretty cool thing, to have a fan base that is just so grateful that this finally exists, and it speaks to them or makes them feel a part of something. I think as we grow, and our fans are turning more into, their team fans, certainly. But, Vancouver last year was a huge highlight. And that was a scenario where it just felt like everyone in that building, it didn't matter who won that game, right? It was just everyone in that building was there to celebrate, the journey, where we're at, the women on the ice. And it's pretty neat to be in those moments as well. But it's also fun when you see the fans actually like transition to, they'll do anything for their team too.
Totally.
And I
Yeah.
know Vancouver will get there pretty quickly this year.
I can confirm that they will. And we were talking before we hit record here, just like the enthusiasm out here is it's really cool. And I think you've, also kudos to you. I think you've selected some great people to lead this franchise. Years from now, Jayna, when you write the book on the PWHL story, what might be something that you're going to look back at and say, like, nobody really knows about this aspect of the journey, but this is something that I'm going to be really proud of, that having gone through with, maybe just not individually, but perhaps with your team.
Well, I think that journey to get to the league that I shared, like through the PWHPA, I think that was some of the most important work, that I've ever been a part of, and something that was, for so many people, so selfless. It was really about the future. And I remember at the time, one of the favorite things I remember Billie Jean King saying to me, was that, when you read history, it's fast, and when you live it, it's slow. And so somebody's
I
going to
love
read
that.
a book someday, right? And they're going to be like, "Oh, look, the CWHL folded, and then they started the PWHL," and that's cool. But when you're living those 4.5 years, that's not what it feels like at all, right? You feel like you're in the trenches. You have days where you don't know what's going to come together. You wonder if
Yeah.
it's all going to fall apart. And so, that's a part of the journey that I think, all of us involved in that, we're really proud of, because of how hard it was. Um, and then, of course, the story of just this launch. And, again, I don't know that we could have scripted it better. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, or it doesn't mean we're where we want to be. But But again, Mark Walter at the table, the initial year one success, expansion in year three, it just feels like, there's the energy around this, and the excitement around it is so great. And we have a ton of work to do, but it's something I think all of us that have been a part of these first couple seasons are also really proud of.
Are you familiar with the sport of hurling?
A little bit.
A little bit. Okay, so I was in Ireland this summer, ironically doing a hockey camp, and we're staying in Dublin. And at that weekend, it's the national hurling final. And what I learned about, so there, the stadium that in 2 weeks the Vikings and Steelers are going to play at, so it's an 80,000 seat stadium. The hurling championships, they sell that out. And one of the teams, the team from Cork, was staying at our hotel, and so we were out one night, you know, socializing in Dublin, and we come back to the hotel. You cannot move in the lobby. It is just red jerseys. It was like the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles were going to play the next day. And so we start chatting with some of the fans, and I quickly learned that these players make no money, that they all have jobs, they're amateur. And then I'm like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, you're all wearing jerseys. Where does the money from the jerseys go? And the tickets for the championship tomorrow? They're like, it's been agreed upon, and it's just sort of part of the culture that all the money from the league gets reinvested back into grassroots hurling, and just to keep the sport alive. And this is a sport that's only played, as far as I can tell, in one country. And I think there's some parallels. Like, I just imagine, I'm like, gosh, like the passion that you would have to have as an athlete in that environment. And I go back to, gosh, 5 Olympics. Like, I'd be so curious to know just the conversations amongst your teammates, and I would imagine perhaps players on other countries or other teams, to say, hey, like, you know we need to keep doing this. And we love the sport, and just that, that passion for the game. There just seems to be the roots of female hockey is just, it's very pure. And I think something that, aspirationally, we can all try and maintain.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it never changes. I can say that, myself and teammates that I played with that I'm still good friends with, we would go back there in a second, right? And not because we were being paid anything, but because those memories and what we got to do and do it together was just, some of the best memories of our lives. And so, I hope that does remain for a long time. But I know there's a rooted passion within, so many people that have been a part of the game for so long. And, as I mentioned, so many people that are still in the game in one capacity or another. And it's a great community to be a part of. And when people care so much about what you're trying to build, it's a pretty powerful thing to be a part of.
um, in those five Olympic games that you participate in, you go to the final every year. You play Team USA. um,
Except
if
in
I had a magic, what's that?
Sweden in 2006.
So Sweden in 2006.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, nonetheless,
Yeah.
lots of head to heads with Team USA. I was trying to rack my brain. I'm like, is there another example? Like, I would almost compare it to boxing, where you have like these trilogy fights where two fighters go toe to toe. And you guys did that. Like, I don't know how many, you know, battles you would have been in. There should be a 30 for 30 documentary on the Canada US rivalry, in my opinion. Out of all those games, is there any moments that stand out to you as being, whether they're the most contested, or perhaps the most rewarding in victory, or maybe the hardest in defeat?
Yeah, I mean, it's everyone has its story. Then they're all so different, and that rivalry it's so real, and you see it, and it's like, there's this. I don't want to use the word hatred, but on the ice, like players will do whatever they have to for their countries. Off the ice, there is actually a really high level of respect between players because for so many years, Canada and the US, like that's how the league was growing, was that rivalry, right? That's what people want to watch. That's a game players want to play in. So there's that, you hate playing against them, but you love playing against them. And so that was always the balance, I think. But, when I look at my five, the first one, we lost. We were heavily favored to win the Olympics because Canada had won every world championship leading into that. And so the disappointment of that, even though we were a very even team with the US, we played 14 times before the gold medal game that year. And we won
Wow.
seven and they won seven. So we were as close as two teams could be. But that external pressure was certainly like, well, Canada always wins. Canada will win. And so when we didn't, that was the first real taste of, did we let people down? Like, did we fail? Trying to figure out what that was. And, with perspective, I think you come around to the fact that, like, hey, we did everything we could. And, one goal in a hockey game doesn't mean that you've failed, or that
Yeah.
you're not a better team. It's like, it's on the day, and we were that close. But I will say that sort of fueled us for the next however many years, right? So we go back in
Yeah.
2002, and we lost 8 games in a row to the Americans. Every time we played them that year, we lost. So we were clearly the underdog in 2002. And we went into that gold medal game and we won. And so that was like the opposite situation. And it was like this Cinderella story of this team that we believed we could do it. Nobody else, including probably our families, didn't think we were going to win that game. But you have that internal, connection within your locker room, and you feel like you're building all year and you're getting a little bit better. You're getting a little bit closer. And then you add that fire in from losing that first one, and we were in the US. And so that was really just that underdog story, like, to a T, which was so cool for our first Olympic gold medal. And then Torino in 2006, that was the game, as I mentioned, we played Sweden, not the US, but that was probably our most, probably the best top to bottom team I played on. Consistent all
Really?
year, successful all year, just really just sort of in a groove. And sometimes you get like that, and it's really hard to maintain it. Everyone's trying to knock you off. And we just had this really consistent season, and really sort of, it wasn't easy in the moment, but when you look back, it would look like it was easy because we just were so, I don't know, we were so well oiled, and just, success all the way along the way. And then that took us to 2010, which was in Vancouver. So then you start
Amazing.
thinking about never played in an Olympics with that much pressure. It was like, how do you win in Canada? One,
Yeah. I never thought about it.
do you
Yeah.
win
No kidding.
hockey in Canada, which is even, under a bigger
Yeah.
spotlight. And so we really dealt with a lot of those sort of external factors that were going to come into play in that season. Um, but what an honor to be able to play in Canada in an Olympic Games. Most athletes, it's rare to get to play in Olympics. It's rare to get to play in multiple Olympics. It's even more rare to play in Olympics in your own country. So we certainly didn't take that opportunity for granted. And to be able to go into Vancouver and win on home soil was incredible. And then, of course, the men's team won as well. And so I really think Vancouver in 2010, changed our country in terms of our sense of pride. I think it turned us into more of an Olympic nation. Very proud of who we are. Not only because of hockey, but we had an incredible performance across multiple sports in Vancouver. So I really think that changed us as Canadians. And then my final game was 14 in Sochi, and I'd never played in a game as crazy as that in terms of the momentum change that happened when we were losing 2-0 with under 4 minutes
Yeah.
to go in the gold medal game. And the way our team got ourselves out of that was something that maybe I won't ever fully understand, but I think that ability to just not give up, not give in, play for each other, never feel like you're out of the game. Um, so to be able to play in a game and that be my last game where you come back from that and then you win in overtime, that was a really special group as well to be a part of. So, each journey is different group of people, different
Yeah.
challenge along the way, and all of them, leading to something really special with a group of people that, those memories last forever. And so it's hard to pick one.
Fair enough. And I would just say, as you recount all that, I can't help but think that, while all this is going on, you probably don't realize it, but just how that's preparing you for really this moment. And you talk about that adversity and you're never out of it. And it's funny how life just steers the right people into the right seats to make things happen. Jayna, as we close, so you touched on the top about how in year one it wasn't a foregone conclusion that you would be expanding to 8 teams in year three of the league, but you got a little bit more data now. There's a bit of a foundation. When you look ahead to say 5 years from now, what sort of potential can the league realize?
Well, I hope we're on the same trajectory and we're just continuing to grow and expand our footprint. And, I don't think this will be the last expansion. So, hopefully a few more teams 5 years from now, hopefully, expanded visibility across media, television contracts, that sort of thing. I think the game has never been better when we look at the talent and the players coming out, really strong group of players that'll enter the league next season. We have obviously a draft class coming in this year that's going to be fantastic, and coming off an Olympic Games, I think I hope the opportunity to redirect people back to the PWHL. Previously, I think people only knew where to watch women's hockey every 4 years. This
Yeah.
year, there's going to be a story that you can follow these players, all year in these teams, and so I hope we can bring in, some new fans to the game as well through the Olympics, and just continue to grow the game, because the talent's never been better. There's more and more young girls playing the game, and we have an amazing fan base that has supported us in such an incredible way, and hope to bring that experience and that feeling and that community to so many more people over the next number of years.
Well, I'll tell you what. I think there was a great statistic when you announced the team was coming to Vancouver, where you referenced that just the surge in registration amongst young female players out here in British Columbia. Without having the data in front of me, I sense that same growth is being experienced in not only in PWHL markets, but across North America. And I know we work with a lot of organizations in Europe, and they're seeing that too. And I would say that above all else, like just our game has never been healthier, and the PWHL has a lot to do with that. And again, as we get set for season 3, respect how busy you are, and really appreciate you taking time to share your story and the origins of the league.
Yeah, anytime. Appreciate the support.